Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on page 1433. So let's sum up what we've been learning, and we'll continue on. So the general flow of ideas we were up to, it began on page 1429. We began to explain Ubira Inyan. What Inyan? The Inyan of how our interaction with the divine, with godliness, through our Avodah, through our work, what level does it reach? So the focus was, the emphasis was that it reaches the level of Malchus, but not higher than Malchus. Higher than Malchus, the divine is beyond our interaction. So even though we have an impact there, but it doesn't change anything, as we learned Shanisi. It opens up those channels. So to explain that, on page 1429, the Rebbe Rasha began to discuss the Zohar that talks about the potter's wheel. And Malchus is like the potter's wheel on the pasuk, "V'hu mesibis mesaper b'tarbelesav lefolam, that kutshebrichu mesabev sivuvim." So our actions below, in turn, trigger in Malchus a reaction, and Malchus in turn draws down from higher levels chesed or gvura according to our actions. So we are drawing from from higher levels, but the direct impact is within Malchus. That was the main theme that he started speaking about in 1429. That itself followed understanding the whole process, how he wants to explain how neshamas, to do their work properly down on earth, need the support of the malachim. The malachim are like the gut, the digestive system that processes the flow of the divine into existence, just like a digestive process, has been learned. And they bring the pasuk he used was Homo mei Eloi rachma rachmenu. Word mei, which is the gut, the digestive system that brings compassion into existence. But this goes back already earlier pages. But I'm not gonna go over that right now, because that's the broader context of neshamas and malachim, neshamas being the pupil of the eye in fulfilling this job, the work of the interface. But bring it back to what we're discussing here. So Malchus is the place that all this takes, is the interaction. And higher than Malchus, he made it clear there's no ispailas there, definitely not one that connects to existence, something beyond. Okay. Now, on page 1430, he spoke about Atzilus being the mamutza, the interface, the 10 spheres of Atzilus, and specifically Zah, but it's still too intense to come into Biyah, so therefore you need Malchus, which in turn diminishes the flow and regulates it to be able to enter existence. And that's the level where Amaisa Tachtenim are Negeya. Okay. Then, middle of page 1432, he brought the next Zohar to explain this, where he elaborated how our work below stimulates above, and specifically in the level of Malchus. And he brought the concept of kol shefer, that when we blow shefer, when we sound the shefer below, we draw down from shefer Allah, the higher shefer, which reaches all the way into Atik, into the Rachamim, the compassion of Atik, and draw that down into existence. But how do we do it? Is our shefer reaches Malchus, like he said. Bina is shefer Allah, is Bina. Malchus, I just want to read the exact language. Right? The kefer is a matter of shefer shalom. Yeah. And he said, and that's what the Zohar asks. How could our inspiration, our stimulation from below reach all the way to Bina? So his answer was, Al Zet Tiritz v'higdim, because Malchus is Alma Tata, which receives from Al Milah. So Malchus is able to access Bina. We access Malchus by triggering Malchus through our Avodah. That's what I'm reading at the bottom of page 1432. Okay. Benimtza, I'm reading from the end of the page. That even though higher than Malchus, our halas man, our efforts from below, our stimulation from below does not reach. Nevertheless, our actions are the cause that in turn allows Malchus to draw from the higher levels. All the way from Bina, Kedesh Kedoshim, all the way from Keser Chachma Bina, from Atik. Okay. The last piece we learned was in the bottom of page 1432, the new paragraph, the Idra Rabbah, another Zohar. Where the Zohar directly addresses this issue. How is it possible that Rishayim, wicked people, could affect that from Midas HaRachmim should become Midas HaDin, from compassion should become severity, judgment. And the Zohar explains, because all the time when Atik is revealed during the time of Raiva de Raivin, that's like Shabbos afternoon, it's a special auspicious time. So in that time, all this compassion of Atik radiates down below. Shaita de Loyes Gala, I'm reading on top of page 1433, at the time when Atik is not radiating, called Din in the Zohar Ampin's minute. That's when all the judgments and the severities of Zohar Ampin gather. Man Goram Lahai Din de Raiva de Loyes Galia. And what causes this, the high dinner, so that causes that the Raiva de Raivin is not revealed. So Mavaya de Kashameir Mebchinas Atik Raiva de Raivin Os Kol HaMadreg is Gam Bezo HaKol B'chinas Chesed Berachmin. So when it's radiating from that higher level, all the levels, even Zoh, are saturated and impacted by Chesed and Rachmin. And I believe that is where we stopped, if I recall correctly. Maybe we read a few more lines. I'm going to continue reading from the top of page 1433. So the discussion is still about how we impact so-called the divine cosmic order above. So we know that we directly affect Malchus because Malchus relates to us, because the whole purpose of Malchus is to be an interface, a channel between the Ein Sof, the infinite divine of Atzilus, and existence. But now we're also learning it's affecting higher levels, but not directly. It's like, in a sense, Malchus is the door you open up. And when you open up the door of Malchus, higher levels flow through. So it's not our directly touching those higher levels, but Malchus controls the flow. And we control Malchus through our actions. Basically what he's saying here. Okay. So I'm going to read on now from the third line on top of page 1433. And the text can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says like this now. Like he writes in Zayar, Vayera 105b. Ishtachen Yerida Latov, Ashkachen Riya Latov. Yeah. There are times Oh, I said I would look up the Zohar. I should look it up. But regardless, the Zohar is saying that there are times where the transmission comes down in a good way, which is like chesed, and there are times it comes down in the opposite way, opposite of chesed. And it's explained elsewhere, when the divine energy radiates in a revealed way, the way it is in its core source, that in turn causes that the tachten, that which is below, should be sublimated or subsumed, bottle to the Elyon, and it follows kemidas v'anogas Elyon. Basically, it means that when that which is below is aligned with that which is above. So put it in simple terms. The Chassidus explains that why don't we work on Shabbos and Yom Tov? Because since the energy that's flowing on that day, Shabbos and Yom Tov, a special day, is one that's higher than the mundane, than the energy of the divine that energizes and sustains existence. So we in turn align ourselves with that higher energy. It's just like when you're going inside the palace of the king, you behave a very different way than when you're working in the field, in your own business, or whatever it is that you're occupied with. You align yourself with the state of being, with the status, with the state, the spiritual state that you're entering into. So that's when things are aligned. If, for God forbid, somebody transgresses and does not align themselves, so then, of course, what will flow to them, it won't be that energy. Basically, if you smile from the bottom up, you'll get a smile in return because you align yourself with the chesed of above. If a person behaves in the opposite way, like we learned earlier in the Zohar, shows atzvus, a sad face, a depressed face, so in turn, that flow of chesed is not going to come in turn to you. So basically, what he's saying is that when the eir is meir begili, so in special auspicious times like Raiva de Raivin, Shabbos in general, but specifically the third meal, then is radiating at a very high level of energy. If we align ourselves, we draw down that energy. So this is talking about the process, in other words, of our interaction with what is going on above. Now, before we said we generate it, but that doesn't mean that above there aren't special moments. There's an Eis Ratzon. For example, Shabbos and Yom Tov holidays, in Shabbos itself, different times, where windows of opportunity open up, so to speak. But we have to make a keli for it. So what's happening here is that our keli is the Ma'aseh Tachtenim, our actions below in turn, so-called, affect Malchus, and Malchus opens the right doors for the flow to flow through Malchus to us. I believe that's where we stopped, actually, before the parentheses. So the truth is, I would like to skip the parentheses and just read on for the flow. So let me do that. I'm going to come back to the parentheses shortly. So let's skip for a moment around 10 lines, 3, 6, exactly 8 lines, I should say. And I'll come back to it shortly. So let's just read on because it'll be easier to understand the flow. And then the segue, then we can go back to the parentheses. The Sibus Adover, says the Rebbe Rashab. I'm going after the parentheses. And the cause for this is, because Raiva de Raiva, that higher level that we talked about, an Atik. Raiva de Raiva means, in Aramaic, Raiva is Rotzen, the Rotzen of Rotzen, the desire of desire, is revealed when there's a kisei, when there's a throne, the keli, and a container, the kabel er v'gilizah, to receive this er and gili. So we need to create the keli, and then that energy can manifest itself. When Malchus is a keli to the gili, oz meir umizgala, that's when it shines and radiates and illuminates. So what's he saying here? He's trying to explain that we don't directly access Bina and higher. But we access Malchus, but Malchus is like the gatekeeper. If our Aveda is Magia, like he said, it reaches and affects Malchus, Malchus opens up the door, and what shines through? The higher levels of the divine. So this is coming to explain, as I discussed in previous classes, to try to balance and reconcile both elements. That on one hand, God is beyond us. Ani Hashem le'shenisi. He's not affected. On the other hand, we know that our Veda does draw down from the highest levels of Elikus, not just from Malchus. How do you reconcile that? So the answer is, our actions directly affect the Elikus that relates to us, Malchus. But once you affect that, Malchus is part of Atzilus. Malchus opens up the doors that allows the Raven to manifest below. Okay. It's going to continue on to explain this, but I just wanted to read a few words, and then I'm going to go back to the parentheses now, and then we'll continue to understand this balance. And as I pointed out, this is all from Biyuri HaZayar, the Tzemach Tzedek's explanation of the Alter Rebbe's Maimer that began citing on page 1429. So there it's discussed at length, relatively even more length than here, but he's addressing this issue, which to me is very clear that it's part of the Ayin Beis theme of interface of how deep our Aveda reaches, and basically the way our Aveda impacts different levels above. So going back to the parentheses, first of all, does anybody want to ask anything before I continue reading here? So going back to the parentheses, 5 lines from the top of the page, he says, Visham. Visham apparently means referring to the Zoyar, I would assume, because he doesn't bring anything else. Yeah, Zoyar. Visham, there in the Zoyar, he says, Shezeu shabo b'derech ma'ivir b'madreges hatachtenim. Okay. So let me explain what this means. Remember, we want to have both aspects. One is that the divine is Ani Hashem le'shenisi. God is beyond change. At the same time, we want to have a relationship, an impact. So this is a big subject. How do you balance those two? So he's saying, according to the Zohar there, he says b'derech ma'ivir. What does that mean? So you may recall we learned about ma'ivir and islapshus, that there are 2 ways that energy flows from one level to the next. Ma'ivir literally means passing through, like a funnel. You use a funnel, let's say, to take a barrel of wine, and you pour the wine, the barrel, into the funnel, and the funnel in turn narrows the flow and regulates it, that it can go into smaller bottles. So you're not doing it, there's nothing changing. It's exactly the same wine. That's called ma'ivir. It's just transferring it. It's transferring it in a way that you can contain it, but it doesn't alter, in any way change, the actual wine. It's the same wine, exactly the same wine. When you say islapshus means that whatever that energy is manifesting itself in the islapshus, it dresses up in the garments of the thing that's channeling it. With a funnel, it doesn't dress up in the garment. The funnel doesn't have any impact. I mean, a good funnel. Obviously, if the funnel is laced with something, you can alter the properties of the wine. But we're talking about a funnel that's basically just playing the role of channeling something. Hislapshus, on the other hand, example for that would be a teacher taking an idea and dressing it up in garments of examples, anecdotes. What's happening? It's not just taking the same idea and just channeling it, like giving it to you in bite-sized pieces. It's altering it. Not altering it, God forbid, that you're changing the content, but you're altering what the student is receiving He's understanding the example more than he's understanding the moral, the nimshal. Why? Because he needs that islapshus. Islapshus essentially means that you're engaging much more in that flow. It's not just you channel things. So in Kabbalah, Chassidus especially talks a lot about Maiver and Islapshus. Maiver, and they each one have a quality that the other doesn't have. The quality of Maiver is that the original does not get diluted. It preserves the original quality. But on the other hand, it may not really fully penetrate and be integrated in the recipient. If the recipient is not on the level of the mashpia, of the transmitter, it's the funneling, like in the maiver, it will not really penetrate. Islapshus, the mile of islapshus is that it's on the terms of the recipient. It's dressing up in a garment, as we know, like a physical garment. When you dress in a garment, of course, the garment is not you, but the garment reflects and has an impact. When that's why we say man machbedusa malbusha. A king wears a kingly garment, so it's true, that's not what makes him a king, but it definitely expresses the dignity and majesty of the king. So in the process, my love islapshus is that it's more in terms of the recipient. On the other hand, the chsaron is, the downside, it in some way, not compromise, some way limits the flow from the original. So when you want to have a real interface, you really want to have maiver and islapshus. So, however, initially you just can't have both, because depending if you're talking about two very distant entities, the only way is through islapshus. Now, there's other factors in islapshus. There's called helen v'hester, concealment. But here, let's talk about. So he's saying now like this: that the Zohar, when he talks about how Ayin Beis and the Tachna is Batla La'elyon, so the Tachna becomes like the only says B'derech Maiver. Meaning that the lower level has not really been transformed. It's just become a keli to allow the higher energy to flow through it, like a funnel. But the Rebbe Rashab wants more than that. So he says, according to what's explained, the Idra Rabbah, which is that not Zohar Vayera, but in the bottom of page 1432, the first Zohar he brought in the beginning of the paragraph. According to the Idra Rabbah, he says, Yesh Leimer, you can say, Shayidei Gili b'chinas Atik nasa gam klei hagvura b'chinas chesed v'rachamim. That through the Gili of Atik, also the keli of gvura becomes chesed and rachamim. That's like a transformation. That's not just like saying gvura stays the same, but right now it's basically nullified and allowing rachamim to flow through it. But we're saying no, it actually becomes nasagam klei gvura b'chinas chesed v'rachamim. So that's more than just maiver. That's how I'm understanding what he's saying here. Yesh leimer, and we can say the sheirish hadin is gal al yidei tzimtzum. The root of din is literally means judgment or severity, is revealed through the tzimtzum. Aval koidim hari adraba yidei koyach hagvul hayigili ha'er. But before the tzimtzum, on the contrary, through the koyach hagvul hayigili ha'er was a gili ha'er. So let's explain what that means. Maybe recall, we talked about this. That God has two faculties, two attributes. One, the power to reveal, and one, the power to withhold. So the koyach habligvul is associated with free flow, a free flow that's infinite. The koyach hagvul, that's bligvul, the era bligvul. The koyach hagvul, on the other hand, is the power of God to contain things. Like we learned from Avedis Hakedus, just as God has the power to create infinite, he has the power to create the finite. Now, when it's God's power, it's a form of gili. Koyach hagvul, even when you say that it's the power to limit, but essentially it's another power of God. It's another revelation of God's powers. So think of it this way. When a wise person is teaching something, and he's teaching and he's a free flow, so that reflects his ability to explain something, to understand something in a very revealed way. But when the Chacham chooses to refrain or chooses to restrain himself and not say everything he knows. So from the point of view of the recipient, there may be it's a concealment. But from the point of view of the teacher, it's just another skill of his. As a matter of fact, in some ways, it even reflects even a deeper skill. So what he's saying is like this: the Sheresh Adin is Gala Idea Tzimtzum. Din in existence, which is judgment, severity, is revealed through the Tzimtzum. But before the Tzimtzum, what was his power? The power to create a Tzimtzum is not a power to conceal, it's a power to limit. It's still God's power. I should say it is a power to conceal. But the focus there is on God's power to conceal, not on the concealment itself. Like the famous example, the father hides from his child in order to elicit the ingenuity of the child to find the father. So the intention of the father in hiding is not to hide, it's to allow the child to go find him. But from the point of view of the recipient, the father right now is concealed. So essentially, it all comes down to which perspective you're looking at this. So now the Rebbe Rasha brings it back to our discussion here. And then he says like this: when the level of Atik radiates, shines, as it is in its core, bli shum tzimtzum, no tzimtzum yet, it has not gone through tzimtzum, then to the klei hagvura adraba, on the contrary, it then becomes a gilui. It's revealing the power of gvura, so to speak, of Elikus, God's power. And this apparently, it doesn't say it explicitly, it sounds to me not maiver, but it's slapshus. Maiver would mean that, like I said before, that nothing stops the flow flows through without affecting and not transforming anything. Where here we're talking about that actually the gevura itself becomes a keli to Gilead Er. The Zeu Gamken, and this is also what he referred to before before the parentheses, Shatachten bottle. This is also due to the fact that the Tachten is nullified. Hainu liyas leibchinis mitzias. It's not about being a separate identity or independent consciousness. Kim b'chinis bitl ba'gili. It's in a state of being basically completely dedicated to the gili, the oz hariu megala es ha'er, and that's when it's megala the er. So let me explain this a bit more to make this a little clearer. Recall earlier the Zohar said very, very explicitly that when a person is besimcha lamata, just want to use the exact language. When a person shows an illuminated, a smiling face, a bright face to others or to above, so he gets that in return. That means that you have made yourself a keli to simcha. If a person shows a bitter face or a sad face, he says, then he receives din. He receives also something that's constricted and also a type of like a negative energy, so to speak. That's based on our ma'aseh tachtenim, our actions. Now the truth is, where does din come from in its root? It doesn't come from negative energy. It comes from God's power to limit, to conceal, koyach hagvul. However, once there was an actual tzimtzum, so then it could manifest in a negative way. And that's when our Aveda comes in. So when we stand on Rosh Hashanah, for example, and we stand in a way, we're in a state that we feel very negative, so then it takes on the shape of negative energy. When we think positive, it's not just that you're drawing down chesed, but also the gvura is revealing the source of the gvura. Similar to what we learned earlier, that Gvuras nimtakim b'sharshan. Because at the end of the day, the Gvura really is originating, it's another divine energy. It's just that when it comes down below, Gvura is tzimtzum, is concealment, and therefore could lead to judgment and severities, and even the harshest ones, as we learned earlier. It could evolve in very harsh judgment. But our avodah makes a difference here, because our avodah helps channel properly what we're channeling. We're channeling chesed, and we're channeling also the divine power within the gvura. I believe that's what this parenthesis is coming to say. Actually, I defeated the whole purpose. I was going to read after the parentheses, and I skipped 2 lines. I went to the wrong parentheses. Okay, we'll read it now. So now the parentheses is finished. Now he goes back like this. So he said, maybe another way of explaining it would be that if a person has, let's say, a negative experience in their lives, so the first step is, of course, is that we have to always look at the positive. But let's say you really can't transform yourself. So at least externally, you're trying your best to be positive. So that's more, you become a keli. So it actually says, bottle. Atachlan botla la elyon, and asa kamidas van hogas elyon. But then you work on yourself more, and you actually transform yourself. You become a happy person, and you're able to muster up more energy to be positive. And that's when the Gevura itself reveals Lamaila, the Gili Lamaila as well. Okay. And then he says like this, yeah, that was a key line that I skipped before. I'm correcting myself now. When it's not revealed, when that higher Gili is not revealed of Raiva de Raivan, then Gevura takes over. That's what the Zohar said before. Gevura takes over. And because of the Tzimtzum and the lack of Gili, all the levels now are in a state of Gvura, of din and judgment. The Sibas Adover, that's what we learned before. And the cause for this is Mishum B'chinas Raiva D'Rayim Mizgala, Mishum B'chinas Raiva D'Rayim Mizgala, Kishiyesh Kiseh V'Kili V'Klei L'Kabel Er V'Gili Zeh. So the cause for all this is our actions below. Well, Malchus is a keli, that's when it radiates and reveals that level. Okay, any questions before I continue?
I had a question about this, the inyan of this time of Raivan, when we open ourselves up to higher revelation, and he says it comes by derech ma'aver. So I know it. Well, there's leisma b'haya atika. So there's no gvura in the traditional sense in Atik, but rather a tagboras of chesed. It's a sort of an overwhelming amount of chesed. So is it possible, he's saying, that in that context, we are able to receive Gvura as it exists in Atik, which is Tagboras of Chesed, rather than what we generally understand Gvura to be restriction. So that's how, when we are in a state of Gvura, we say, how can a Rasha be transformed or receive that level of chesed? And he's saying here, because in that moment you're getting a type of gvura, your own gvura is essentially, you're getting transformed, a sense, or being affected by gvura from Atik, which is filled with chesed, the tagboras of chesed. It's not real gvura, because there's no, it's like I said, leis small and b'hayatika. Do you understand the question?
Not really.
Okay.
Are you asking me, how does this reconcile Gvura with less Mala B'Hayatika?
In part, but what I'm understanding here is that it comes down by Derek Meiver, means it comes from Atik as it is an Atik, rather than being dressed up, as you said. So therefore, it's the way Gemara
Actually,
is
his
an Atik.
conclusion here is that it is b'derech hislapshus, is what he said in the parentheses. Meiver was just one zayar. He said, according to the other zayar, it appears much more than just Meiver. So, not clear. Are you focusing on Meiver and hislapshus now? Or you're focusing on.
Well, I was focusing on the Meiver part, how to understand that better.
He says, so the Zohar, from the Zohar Sham, they're b'derech Meiver. But then, according to the Idra Rabbi Yesh Lemer, that more than just Meiver, it becomes a keli. Meiver is not a keli. Funnel is not a container that contains the energy, it just channels it. So then, according to the Zohar, it's deeper than that, that the Klei HaGvura actually becomes Chesed and Rachamim. That's one point. So I'm not sure what part you want to focus on.
That's all right. I'm gonna redo this again on my own. I don't want to get caught up with something. If the question's not clear to you, then let me just withdraw it.
Okay. Spoken like a good attorney. Okay. So think it through. I mean, good, fine. So, okay. Okay. V'harizeh, I'll continue reading. V'harizeh, I think a lot of things are also going to become clear as we read on, because he's in the middle of it, and it's a little dense piece, as we can see, and just all come together. I think as we read the whole thing, then we'll be able to go back and dissect it more properly. He says, "V'harizeh," this is like al derech pischi li kechudesh machat v'ani eftach lecha kepischi shalula. Okay, so it's a Maimon Chazal that says, you, Hashem is speaking to us. You open for me up the eye of a needle, the Chudash Machat, which means a very small hole, just a small opening, the eye of a needle. Vani, and my response will be, Eftach lecha kepischa shalulam. I will open for you up the wide corridor of the ulam. The ulam was the hall, the large chamber in the Beis Hamikdash, which was very wide. So you do your part by opening up a small opening within you, and in turn, that will draw down a large opening from above. So he explains, Piskeli kechuda shel machat. What is that level? What is the eye of a needle? Hainu b'chinas Malchus. That's Malchus. Shesham magia lo asman. That's where Allah Osman, our efforts from below, reach there, as we've been learning. So if someone said to you, you have to jump and reach heaven itself, that's not something in our capacity. A human being is limited, but we are expected, as much as we can, to open up at least the eye of a needle. That's Malchus. That's where our Avodah reaches. That's what's expected. Okay. And why is it called like a needle? Because a needle, what does a needle do? When you use a needle for embroidery or for weaving, you're repairing. Let's say you want to sew something. So the sakin b'chinas hamalchus lias muchenes lekabla se'er milmayla. So in a sense, when we are doing our work below, it in turn generates this level of malchus. We repair it, so to speak, or we improve it. We beautify it. It should be ready, muchenes, that malchus should be in an appropriate place, lekabla se'er milmayla, to receive the air from above. So what we see here is we're engaging a level of godliness as it relates to us, and making sure that that level is completely, properly primed and ready to receive whatever has to flow through it. And we go back to the potter's wheel. The clay itself and the wheel itself are just tools, but it's our actions that in turn cause the potter to shape Malchus accordingly. So basically, our work is so-called aligning, making sure the machine is working properly, so then it can draw down all the energy it needs to draw down. This is a vital point, a very vital point. I'm going to elaborate more on it, but let's continue reading. Okay. And that now Hashem says, when you do that, you do your part, and you clean up your act, so to speak, and you make sure that everything on your end is clean and perfected, then memela nimshach. Then the channels are open. Once the channels are open, so memela, it'll just flow through. In other words, if you think of it this way, God created the world. He used the tzimtzum to conceal his energy in order to create a defined and independent consciousness, right? If everything was done right, Adam and Chava had not eaten from the tree of knowledge, they would have aligned themselves and not been distracted or seduced by the tzimtzum and by the nochash, the serpent, and all the things that distracted them. And they would have aligned themselves to what they were created for, la'avda l'shamra, to serve. But they didn't. They were distracted. And that distraction led them to eat from the tree of knowledge, which led a whole series of events that intensified the concealment of the divine. The God concealed himself was not in order to conceal himself. It was in order for us to be wise enough to see through the tzimtzum, like we learned, that we should not buy into the illusion that God is not here because we can't see him and we can't relate to him, but to see through by working hard and connecting ourselves. If you don't, what happens is the concealment now begins to intensify and ultimately will evolve to dinim and gvuris, even gvuris koshes, like we learned earlier, very severities. To use the example I always use, all of existence is one integral, unified entity. It's all connected to Hashem Echad. So how is it possible that human beings can hurt each other? The injustices that men have perpetrated on other men, in the worst possible way even, the Holocaust. We're all part of one. How is it possible that that could happen? The only reason is because we don't feel and sense our connection. So we could easily see the right hand can think that the left hand is its enemy, and it just tries to destroy itself, as absurd as it sounds. But that's what concealment can do. If it's misused and misunderstood, the concealment, which was meant to bring out the best in us, to connect even though we don't feel godliness, to make a dira bit tachtainim, those tachtainim were created not for us to allow the concealment to control us, but that we should see through the concealment and realize this is our opportunity to reconnect, to connect. But when we misunderstand it and then it begins to devolve, it can devolve into the worst possible crimes that humans can perpetrate on each other. On the other hand, if we do the Aveda properly, even after the years of all the sins and the transgressions, like Avram Avinu, he began to reverse the process by bringing the Shekhinah back down. And all these years through Golus, we have worked hard. What are we doing? What we're doing is trying to clean up the world. The toxins that were released and the pollutants that contaminated the world, that are blocking out the divine energy from flowing, because of the let's call it the misdirected and abused symptom. So now we're trying to repair that, and that's how we bring the Geula. What are we directly impacting? Malchus. We're opening up the eye of a needle. We're doing whatever we can to repair our lives, improve our lives, to make sure that we're kelim as much as we can do. Once we free ourselves from toxins, what happens? The healthy flow, even on a human being, when a person has toxic or poison inside them, what happens? It compromises the flow of energy coming from the blood, the heart, and the soul. When we clean up our act, what happens is now you're aligned. So now the flow can resume to flow through us and within us. Essentially what he's saying here. So we have to open up the eye of the needle, do our part to clean up. That affects Malchus. Malchus now is no longer polluted. So once it's not polluted, now it's clear and clean. So think of it like a clogged pipe. If the pipe is clogged, the water, even though it's there, can't flow properly. We unclog the pipes, which means our avodah of, like he said, tikkun, the tikkun of Malchus. Just want to read the exact words. The sakim b'chinas hamalchus is muchenes lekabla sa'er mamayla. Now the keli is cleaned. So then ozai mamela. We don't need to do a direct thing. Now you've opened up the pipes. The water is there. It's just like you could have a healthy heart, but if you have clogged arteries, God forbid, it can't flow properly. Once you've unclogged. So now, mamela nimshach ha'er mamayla mayla. So the oil then from Bina, from Atik, from all the way to the highest levels can flow through it. V'zeu v'ani eftach l'cha. And that's what means I will open for you the corridor, the wide corridor of the ulam. The afal pisha b'chinas v'ani eftach l'cha ein asus l'tata magas l'sham. Even though the level that I open up for you, but I, meaning God, ani, your avodah can't reach there because it's higher. We can only reach Malchus, the eye of the needle. That wider corridor is a higher level that our asus l'tata does not directly touch. Im kol zeh, nevertheless, b'hot talia is dependent on us. So we don't directly change anything there. It's like when you unclog a pipe, you're not directly affecting the water, you're just affecting that the flow should flow through you. So you're affecting the pipe, or in this case, the eye of the needle. And that, b'mela, so b'hot talia, k'adei pischili, because when God says, pischili, you open for me up the eye of the needle, b'mela ani eftach l'cha. B'mela, then you've opened up the channels. So then I open for you up the kipiska shalulam. The kasher ampa the Malchus nehirin, when the face of Malchus smiles, when nehirin means shines, glows, like an aura, v'hi b'b'chinas kisei muchenes lekabla sa'er, and it's in a state like a kisei, like a throne, a seat, a keli, to receive there, nimshach ba mamela b'chinas eir elya. Then mamela automatically, what will be drawn, because it's now it's a keli for that, so it will draw the eir mamela, the higher eir that which we don't directly access, but now we've opened the doors. So in other words, God is here with us in this world all the time. Einaid Malvada. Even in Tachteinim, even in the lowest of the lowest of the low, godliness is there. Question is whether we are ready to receive. What did the Kotzker Rebbe say? When he was a child, they asked him, where is God? He said, wherever you let him in. We don't have to create godliness. We have to reveal godliness. How do we do that? By opening up the channels that we are able to reach. That opens up and the godliness emerges. And I always use Michelangelo's line, even though it's not I don't know if it belongs here in Ayin Beis. When he was asked, how do you carve those beautiful angels in the marble? He said, I see the angels trapped in the marble. I carved and set them free. It's a very different way of looking at things. It's not like the beauty and the angels have to be found. They're there, but they're trapped. Our job is to remove the excess and allow this energy to emerge. So here he says it very explicitly. Okay. And he's going to continue to explain. I see he's using text, content ideas that he already talked about in volume 2. Any questions? I think this helps a lot in understanding everything we learned before. Yeah.
Correct me if this way of thinking maybe is off base or maybe it's aligned with what we're talking about. So let's say if there's something coming out from Memala, from above, that doesn't, from our perspective, is not the best thing for us. That's the concept of accepting it with the ahava, with love, by just doing that, even in the beginning, even if we don't understand as to why it's happening to us. If we're accepting it with love, then that's the turning of the wheel in Malchut to open up a channel, and then Hashem will show us eventually the real chesed that was hidden within this Gevurah. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, even independent of Ayin Beis, just for the record. Because here he did not speak about. I'm saying that's a fair statement regardless, not necessarily Ayin Beis, because he didn't refer here to what we call Makabel Yisurim Ba'ava. He didn't discuss if somebody has a negative thing that happens in their life, even if you don't understand, you should still accept it with simcha, and that will open up the channels. He didn't say that explicitly here. Can this be used to explain that? Yes. That's one way of explaining it. It's what you just described is one application, but there are many others. Here he's talking about in general that when if you want to have a special guest come to your home, and like the big king, the great king, you first have to clean up your home. You have to make sure your home is clean, conducive. So then that in turn will elicit the hamshachah. That would be another way of explaining it. So what you said is one application that relates to this, but the way I just explained it. Okay. So we can continue. He says like this now. V'zehu kamayim aponim alponim, kein leva adam. And this is the meaning when we say like a face is reflected in water. So it says, so too one heart of a person is reflected in another heart. And that's inevitable. You look at water, you don't need to do anything. You just have to make sure that you're looking into the water and the water is clean. You're going to see a reflection. So the pasuk says, same thing with the heart of a person. Leva adam, la adam. That when a person opens their heart, so that will be reflected in another person's heart. So he says that's ayin mashin is bar il mizeh. Delve into what we discussed earlier. This is in volume 2, the long discussion about kamayim aponim alponim, which is very relevant here actually, because he's discussed there how deep does our face affect the face above? Similar to what he's talking about here. So he says, Pirush, aponim el aponim. What does it mean? What are the two faces here? Kamayim aponim laponim. So he says, Hainu kinis yoir Hashem ponov elov elecha. Like we say in Birchas Keinim, yoir Hashem ponov elecha, that God should shine His face to you. Shu izgalus ponim da Atika. That's referring to the face of Atik. Beponim dezun. That should be reflected and shine toward the face of Zoh and Malchus. Kameshakosah b'Zohar Vayikra daf tezvov seif amar aleph. He says in Zohar Vayikra 15, the end of page A, 15a, Ubepirish HaRamasham. And the Ramaz, Ramishah Zakuta, the Ramaz's commentary there. And how does this take place? V'hu? Nimshach Masar Sarusa Deleva Odam Atachtan. In order to, like he explained in volume 2, so he explained two ways. You could say the pasuk is referring to that the face reflected in the water is a moshel an example of how one heart is reflected in another. He also said the other way around. When our heart below affects the heart above, it draws down the face above as well. Like he's saying here. Now, what does he say? He says, I guess, for who? That when we, the leva adam atach, the heart of the person below, shows love to the adam, to the divine above, Tikkun of Malchus, shenikra the mus kamara adam, the level of Malchus, which is called the mus, the likeness that appears like a person. So when we were created with B'Tselem Elokim, so our face is creating the image and likeness of the divine. So when we, from the leva adam lamata, tachten la adam malchus nikrat mus kamara adam, ayim ashakosher b'zayar. I'm sorry, ayim ashakosher b'ramaz b'sabed mishpatim daf tzadik dal Ayin Beis. I'd have to look that up. They discusses this. V'hainu ki afshe b'chinas haponim leponim hu be'etzem l'mayel masus l'tata. Even though haponim leponim, face to face, that he's describing, the reflection of the face is fundamentally higher than asus l'tata. It's higher levels. So even though we're talking about higher levels above, but how does it? What ultimately was the initial trigger? That was asus l'tata. The chen leva adam la adam, and so is it. Just as it is with the ponim, the face below and the face above. Same thing with the heart of the person, the Adam, shekashenitaken binyan Malchus. When Malchus, the binyan, the structure of Malchus is repaired and perfected, so then, ba'efen aroi, in a proper and appropriate way, ozai, memela nimshach ba'ed elyon mamayla b'chinis yoyed Hashem panov. Then automatically, what would be transmitted within it is the Oyer Elyon from above, Yoyer Hashem Panav Elecha. That Hashem's face, that He will shine His face to us. Right. Still not finished, but I'm going to stop here. If anybody wants to ask anything. And I take this back. We'll just say this. We discussed it earlier. This goes back a lot to the Kabbalistic explanations of why we need Oris and Kalim. Because the Kalim is where the impact of our Veda takes place. The Oris are more the divine aspect in it. And that's where the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, have their different opinions. What's our impact? Is it on the Kali or is it on the Oir? This goes back to our discussion when we first began discussing it in, I believe it was on page, Espilus, page 1428. So I'm going to go back to that in the coming classes to explain that more. But if you recall then, we spoke about what the spheres are. Are they the Kalim? Are they the Eris? So it's all part of this discussion. Does anybody want to ask anything? Okay. But just remember, the key thing to remember is that our Avodah has a direct impact on Malchus. And when we do that, we automatically create the channels that allow the divine to manifest from the highest levels. So it's like a two-step process in a way. Now, of course, I should add that there's also Hashem first begins by initiating when He gives us a gift, like let's say Pesach, Yitzis Mitzrayim. So that came from above. Then we make a keli through Sfira Sa'imer. We count 49 days. And what happens next? The 50th comes from above again, because it's beyond us. So we're getting a gili that's more than that, what's commensurate to our efforts. But our efforts open up those channels, and now we're ready. It's like the teacher teaches an idea to the students, but then the students have to do something. You have to do your part, your homework. And as you make your effort, and you make your keli, that in turn will draw out and elicit from the teacher even more than you would have, than that was initially given and that we would have reached on our own. So it's a constant dual process. And this is really like, if you think about it, this is what love is about. A love relationship, a loving relationship between two human beings, between spouses. A healthy one is reciprocal. You don't stand on principle. Sometimes one of the spouses initiates a gesture, then the other spouse responds, and sometimes the response will give you even more than what you initiated, and vice versa. And it goes both ways. It's a constant ebb and flow of a process of how we integrate it, because you don't want one partner alone to be the driving force. You want both, but sometimes one initiates, the other responds. The response then can come, as I said, with a deeper energy. Now, of course, we're talking about Hashem. There's the parts of Hashem that are completely beyond us. We're talking about humans. We're more or less equal to each other. But the same idea can be applied. It's essentially the process of a real relationship.
Can you explain this whole process in the auspicious time of Shavuos that's coming up, and how we can get the most out of it, please?
Well, I think I just said it. Basically, we always talk about B'chol Moedecha, like the story of Rab Zusha. He was crying not why he's not like this one or not like that one, why he's not like Zusha. Sfiras HaEmer that we're doing right now followed Yetzias Mitzrayim, Pesach. What is the work right now is to do whatever we can to clean up our act. Our chesed, our gvura, our teferes, our netzach, our hoid, Yesod, Malchus. We're coming now down to the wire, the last few days. What's expected from us is just do your part, not ask you to do something that's beyond your capacity. Yeah, push yourself as much as you can. But everyone has their capacity. Then what happens in turn, the more your so-called keli is there, like we said, the cleaner it is, you now have open channels. It's like your arteries are as open as they can possibly be. And then what happens, Shavuos, or in general, then the flow comes flowing big time. But if a person enters into Yom Tov, all fachmuret, all very depressed, and you bring all your baggage and all your, shall we say, your melancholy from the week into Shavuos or into Shabbos, then what happens? So even though Shavuos could be radiating with all kinds of power, but you're not there. You're sitting there like all down. Your system is clogged, not letting the Shavuos experience to manifest itself in you. This is the simplest way to put it. So it's a two-way street. You'll say, why doesn't God get me out of this melancholy? Well, there's some things we have to do. Some things will not be done for us. You have to show up. You have to some way get something going. And then there's a response from above that will be bigger and more powerful. It will be not commensurate, won't be proportionate. You'll get much more from above than what you give from below, but you have to do something below. What that is, I think each one of us has to speak to Mashpia or do a little soul searching and say, you see to yourself, what can I do I haven't done before? That can be somewhat of a okay. And I'm not just talking about buying a cheesecake, obviously. We're talking here something a little internal. That's the best way I can put it.
Well, cheesecake does put me in a good mood.
Cheesecake could also help clog some stuff too. Yeah, that's the story. That's why you say Yav Pruta La'oni v'Hodem Matzli. They give a pruta, a coin to a poor person, and then afterwards you daven. Story with Tzemach Tzedek, Now once he was rushing to davening, and there was a poor person outside, and he was rushing, so he didn't give him a tzedakah. Then during davening, he realized he's not having the gili. He'd always have the Alter Rebbe would appear to him. He didn't feel that. So he realized, and he went outside, he realized that he did not make the keli properly. When we say in the beginning of davening, Hareini mekabel alai mitzvus esa shel v'ahavta lecha kamecha. Why? Because that's a keli. You want Barchenu Avinu, you want God's blessing, you have to be one. God wants his children to be united. So when he sees that people show extra measure of Avos Yisrael, that creates a keli for Hamshacha from above. I mean, it's really basic stuff that we hear all the time. What Ayin Beis is adding is a lot more the inner mechanics of it, and the dynamics of Malchus and Bina and Atik, to understand the whole process of it. But essentially, that's what it really comes down to. So it's not as abstract as it may initially sound. Okay. Good. How's everybody been?
We're counting the days till you come back. Besides counting Sphere, waiting for you.
Oh, Amen.
Okay, well, I'm back, and I just got back this morning. I was on red eye.
Oh, wow.
Can we ask where you were?
Yeah, I was in California.
California.
My daughter's birthday was Sunday, so we
Oh,
went there for Shabbos,
Mazel Tov.
a few days. And now we're back, and we continue the Avodah. Plenty to do.
We made
Remember,
a
Ayin Beis is a Shavuos
Chaim for my granddaughter the same day, Rosh Chodesh.
Right, Mazel Tov, I saw. Yeah, Mazel Tov to you. Yeah. And now we resume. Now my plan is I don't have any real travel coming, at least not in the near future, but I'll let you know. And we continue our journey. Remember, Ayin Beis is a Shavuos Hemshech. It started in the year 1912, Shavuos 1912. 111 years ago. Yeah, we started learning it 100 years, in the 100th year, centennial, like 11 years ago. Okay, so I'm going to stop here, a little more than halfway down.